Good to see you too.
Welcome to the Morning Phillips series, hosted today on YouTube. The Morning Phillips series, originally hosted at the Garage Co-working Space in Rapid City, South Dakota, was created to discuss philanthropy, civil society, and community. It is an opportunity to have a conversation with good people doing good things, creatively and collaboratively. The format is a conversation, not a presentation. 2 tables, 2 chairs, 2 computers, and a community of interested people. Today, we are pleased to have with us a nonprofit leader, a pre-COVID world traveler, and a former South Dakota resident. A special thanks to the Bush Foundation, the NewMag Group, Rural Philanthropy Institute, and the Garage for hosting today's conversation. Thanks to all who have joined us. Now, with all that, we are pleased to welcome Walter Woods, CEO of the Humana Foundation. Walter, thanks for taking time to be with us this morning. I know this is a very busy time, and there's been some announcements at the Humana Foundation recently that are very important that we'll want to talk about. But first, can we talk about your roots to and your connection to South Dakota?
Yes.
And now, you were in South Dakota for how many years, and what were you doing?
I was in South Dakota for 3 years. I moved there from Washington, D.C., and went out to work with the Good Samaritan Society, and eventually became the CEO of the Good Samaritan Society's foundation.
And from there, you began.
Excuse me.
Go ahead. From there, you became the CEO of the Humana Foundation.
Yes.
When you think of your time in South Dakota, what is one of the things? What is one of the learnings from your years at Good Samaritan Society in South Dakota that you took to your new position?
Well, South Dakota was a very beautiful state. I learned 4 S's from that experience. In the snow and silence, you either sink or you swim. And I learned how to swim in South Dakota. When the weather, the minus 40 degrees below, all that sort of stuff. It was, I learned a lot about myself. I went inward to really understand even more deeply what I would like to achieve in my life.
Will you say more about that? What do you want to achieve in your life?
I want to strengthen communities. I want to inspire people to inspire themselves, to recognize that this is the greatest time to be alive in the history of humans. I think that there's so much that we have access to. In spite of what's happening in the streets right now, there are opportunities. I think there's a silver lining in all of this that is really teaching us that we've got to work together more collaboratively. We've got to stop dividing ourselves. We have to celebrate diversity and stop criminalizing it and penalizing it, because when we work together, we can achieve anything.
So why is now the best time to be alive?
Now is the best time to be alive because we have access to more than we've ever had. We have more knowledge than we've ever had before. There's just so much that we can do when we, again, work together. We recognize that the boundaries we create between ourselves are man-made. They're not what we're born into. So we've got to remember to stick to the basics, to live, to trust each other, and to work together.
Why is it so hard? Why is trusting, and especially now, I think, why is trusting each other so difficult?
I think because our leadership, in lots of ways, are not modeling the way. So people are like kids, right? And if you watch your parents and you see your parents doing something, you emulate that. There's an opportunity, I think, for really show up as stronger role models, and that's not really happening right now.
This isn't something that's happened overnight. What's changed in our society? You've been in the nonprofit sector for most of your career. What have you seen change that has taken us to this point when things are so divisive and we don't have that trust? Because it seems, in contrast to philanthropy and to the idea of America, to not trust.
I think the pandemic has been a major disruption that is in ways causing us to recognize the opportunity we have at this moment. I think we're at a cliff right now. We can either jump off of the cliff and fly, or jump off the cliff and crash to the ground. We are in a space and a time right now that we've never experienced before, where we can really, and especially in the United States, take on this issue of racial justice for once and move forward from that. Until we're able to address that in this country, because it's so rooted in our history, 401 years of since slavery, since the first African ship came to the United States. So I think that we have an opportunity to think differently about how we advance our values and the mission of this country.
Walter, there's a lot there, bro, and let's unpack it a little bit. When you talk about addressing the racial issues in our society, how do we do that in your mind? If you could design that for our country, what does that look like?
It requires a level of vulnerability that we have to be willing to have, and admissions of acts that have happened in the past that we recognize as being wrong, and apologizing for those things. And so going through a period of reconciliation, like other countries have done, in particular Germany, with their Jewish population. They were very intentional about reconciling around that tragedy that happened to that population. And the same thing needs to happen here. Hasn't happened yet.
Even in Germany today, though, my understanding, and other places, there's the extremes that we're struggling with, I think, in the United States. How do we, do you understand the same thing? Are you reading the same thing?
Recognize those as extremes and a minority of the population, and we celebrate the majority and we bring them together in ways that we haven't before. It's something that we have to constantly discuss and constantly work on. We can't do it once and suggest that it's going to go away. It has to be worked on actively all the time.
So it seems as though we're having some of those conversations, and I know let's talk about the statues around the country that people are discussing, or the names of military bases and things. You grew up in a military family, right?
Yes, I did, in the Air Force.
And so when you hear these discussions about bases, when you hear the discussions and the removal of statues, how do you process that? How do you break that down? And where do you land?
I don't think it's a matter of what I feel about that, because that's a personal opinion. I think each statute should be determined by the community that they're in. It's a conversation that needs to be intentionally developed by the leadership of that community, which should come across all the sectors, government, nonprofit, and private, to decide as a community what to do with those statues. I cannot, from my stance here in Louisville, Kentucky, tell somebody in Mobile, Alabama what to do with their statues. That's just not what I want to do. But I would like to see them have a process in place, an equitable process that allows everyone to come together to decide what to do with the statues. And if they should be removed, they decide that they should be removed. What should they be replaced with? Where should they be housed? Those aren't questions for you and I to discuss. There's questions for those communities to discuss. It's a community opportunity.
So you mentioned equitable. Can we talk a little bit of what is the difference between equal and equitable? Do you mind walking through that for a minute?
Equality, there's a huge difference.
Yes.
Equality celebrates sameness, and equity meets people where they are. So if you have a bike, say for instance, a bike or just a regular bike that you want people to ride.
One second, Walter. It's Sturgis time. So are we talking about a motorcycle? Or are we talking about a pedal bike?
We're talking about a pedal bike. And
Okay.
I do know what Sturgis is at this time of the year. It's millions of people there. I went to that while I was there. It's unbelievable.
It is. I think yesterday I heard that it might be the largest gathering
since
the pandemic, at
I
least
can't
in the United States.
gathering. I don't know if I would support that, but
Yeah.
that's my opinion.
So
This is not a gathering. This is a public health issue, not a political issue. This virus is very serious. We've got to wear our masks.
So let's go back to that, but let's first go to the pedal bike and your example of equity and equality.
Yes, so the pedal bike. There are lots of people that can ride the bike. Some people are taller than others. So equity is about making sure that the bike adjusts to the height of the person that wants to ride it. Equality is about having everybody ride the same bike in spite of how tall they are. So it really doesn't meet them where they need to be met. So equity, again, is about meeting people where they are.
So how do we do that on these huge social issues, or societal issues? How do we have schools that, how do we do that? When you look at education and you look at healthcare, because it's not okay just that you and I have the same healthcare, it's that I don't know how do you imagine that happens
Well, the way
practically?
to do that is making sure that everyone has access to the same resources, right? There are certain populations, for instance, broadband, that don't have access to the internet. So there are elements of equity, like accessibility, like affordability, like availability. Some communities don't have grocery stores, so they don't even have the availability of fresh fruits and vegetables in their community. So how, as a community, can we be more equitably um, uh, responsible to all of the communities, all of the neighborhoods in our community, in a way that gives them equitable access to, affordability to, availability to, awareness of um, the resources that they should have available.
Walter, do you then suppose that the job to do that, the responsibility to do that, rests with our government, or is it with
It's a
businesses?
shared responsibility that comes from all the sectors working together. The government cannot do everything for everyone. That's not the purpose of government. The government is one of the players in community that has access to a different set of resources that can be deployed in an equitable manner across the community in collaboration with the private sector and the public sector.
The nonprofit sector.
Yes, the nonprofit sector.
Yeah. So we're in this unique time. I mean, this is an understatement.
Yes.
Help us understand the role that nonprofits should play right now, especially funding agencies like yourself, large foundations, during the pandemic that we're in, and the heightened awareness of the racial injustice that exists. What's the role of a foundation like Humana's?
Well, the role of our foundation specifically is to improve and sustain healthy outcomes for individuals and communities. And the way we do that is by deploying the 5 forms of our philanthropic capital. I call it Smurf capital. So it's social, moral, intellectual, reputational, and financial. Financial is obviously the easiest way for us to do that, and that's what we have historically done for going on 40 years. Starting next year, we will be having our 40th anniversary. But there are also those other forms of capital, and if you break those down, the social philanthropic capital, it's really about expanding your networks and extending your networks to populations, to organizations that have not typically had access to those networks. And again, it goes back to those elements that I talked about of access and accessibility, and making sure that people that have traditionally been locked out of access have access to your networks. And that's one of the things that we do with our investments is expand our networks to those investees that we're working with. You also have intellectual philanthropic capital. So that's basically the stuff between your ears. So we have associates, employees, 50,000 across our enterprise. And how do we leverage that intellectual capital and deploy it into the communities that we're targeting in a way that helps them develop solutions in a sustainable way? We have episodic volunteer opportunities that bring our associates together with nonprofits to focus on, for instance, one of them that we're working on right now with a historically Black college is an online platform. So helping them develop an online platform so they can expand their reach outside of Kentucky to students across the country that are interested in the programming that they're offering. Another one is with OATS, Older Adults Technology Services. It's another one of our investments that we made an investment in through our COVID funding to expand digital access to seniors. So we know that 9 million seniors in America are disconnected from the internet. So we want to close that gap. And with this investment, we are promising over the next 2 years to connect at least 1 million seniors to the internet. And not just connect, but help them understand the resources that they will be connected to and really make this about their healthcare journey and improving that journey through access to the internet.
Walter, you mentioned social as part of the capital you get to deploy, social and moral. Will you talk about that a little bit? What's the moral component of that?
Moral
and why is that and why is that important?
Moral is about really standing up and being courageous and lifting and putting your voice in the conversations that are happening, especially now in communities across the United States when it comes to the civic demonstrations, helping people understand that we are a corporate citizen, we're a part of these communities, and so it's part of our responsibility because of the resources we have access to lean into these conversations and participate. So being morally courageous to speak out, to speak up, to help people understand how we can be a part of the solution.
Walter, you grew up in an Air Force family, moved around, you've traveled around the world numerous times, seeing different places, and I want to talk a little bit about those places and a bit about those communities and how and what you've learned from those communities that you visited and lived in. But the fact is, race plays a part of this too. And we look at the world differently because we're different races. And so much of the conversation, today around the country is about race. Would you agree?
I think ostensibly it is, but no, it's not.
Okay.
It's about our inability to recognize our commonness as opposed to our diversity. So when I was growing up, it was always made very clear to me by other people that I did not belong. I think as an individual, you can choose to internalize that and accept it, or you can choose to sit next to it and recognize that it's not who you are, it's who they are, and it's something that they have to figure out. We have to learn how to sit next to all the isms that exist in the world: sexism, racism, homophobia, recognizing that they don't define who we are, that our self-worth is determined by ourselves. We have the choice every 24 hours of our life to choose to accept or not to accept ourselves and the beliefs of those around us. I chose, I'm not exactly sure how this happened. Maybe my parents had something to do with it. I chose to believe that I am a positive force in the world, in the universe. And I can make a difference by not only my example and showing people that things are possible, because I've done that many, many times in my life. Lots of people have told me I can't do something. And not only did I do it, but I exceeded everyone's expectations. But we have to understand that at the end of the day, which is why I've also gotten rid of television 10 years ago. I took television out of my life because I thought it was toxic and it was preventing me from believing in myself, that we can choose to believe that we can do something. And we can choose to believe that there are other people out there who want to help and who want to celebrate our success and want to help us achieve our dreams. It's very important to surround yourself by people that support you unconditionally and not by the ones that don't. Necessary endings are a very integral part of my life. I, every 10 years, decide, now it's becoming every 5 years, which relationships do I have to end and which ones do I have to deepen? And I have to constantly purge, prune those people out of my life that do not support me unconditionally. That's just, I don't have time. I'm not getting any younger. So I've got to try to stay positive because there's so many negative influences in the world that can be distracting. And so you have to learn how to move through the world, through the noise in a way that allows you to still stay vibrant, resilient, and focused on the purpose that you were born into. We're all born into something, and we just have to understand and discover what that is. We're all on a purpose path. And the more more time you spend with yourself, understanding who you are and what you want, the more you're able to achieve your purpose path.
Walter, give us some insight on that journey. How have you walked that path to find who you are? Thinking that we've got a number of people joining us in this conversation, what advice, what wisdom around that deepening of an understanding of who you are? I mean, Aristotle talks about it, writes about it, that if people are authentic, if they are who they genuinely are,
Yes.
and each of us do that, our society will flourish. Because and you see that in mainstream religions, whether that's Catholicism or you see that those same messages. What in your life has allowed you or been a part of continuing to understand who you are that grounds you in that in this journey?
There's several things. I think the first one is being courageous but not reckless. So recognizing fear is like sugar, and it's something you need to release from your psyche, from your daily thoughts. We are, like I said, more capable of achieving things than we know. So it's important to lean into your life in a courageous way, in a fearless way, bringing with you those people that can support you and encourage you and help you achieve what you want to achieve. So I would definitely say that's the first thing. The second is being a little bit scared but not paralyzed. So this goes back to the theme of releasing your fear. It's okay to be scared, but you cannot let your fear paralyze you in a way that allows you not to move forward. We have a lot of conversations in our head all the time. It's important for us to get out of our own way, to not live in our head, but to live in the world, to be action biased in a way that allows you to move forward and not be paralyzed. Resilient, but not forgetful. So I think life is about growing. It's about changing your behavior as a result of what you're learning. And that's what part of being resilient is about, is being able to get back up, to learn from what did not work out. I don't like to call things mistakes because I don't think we have mistakes. I think we have learning opportunities that if we choose to learn from them, they won't happen again. They'll happen differently in a more successful way.
What's the biggest learning for you, Walter, in your life? Did you say that you was your birthday recently?
No, it's in September.
It's coming up.
It's coming up.
So when you do this, when you look back over your life, as we get closer to your birthday, what's the biggest learning in your life?
To get out of your own way, to not, to recognize that, again, we are constantly getting in our own way. We're listening to those inner tracks in our head that are distracting us from being present and recognizing this moment and knowing that this is the only thing we really have in our lives is what is happening right now, not tomorrow. tomorrow is never given. And we've seen so many examples of that, especially what just happened in Beirut with the explosion at the port. There's so many things like that that are happening every day. And the only moment we have is right now.
When we look, you bring up Beirut, you've traveled all over the world. What have you learned from those travels? When you think of those communities that you've been in, both lived and traveled to, when we think inclusion is one of these things that is now in people's vocabulary, can we talk a bit about what inclusion means in your mind? And then can you point to some places that you visited, that you or lived in, truly grasped and were inclusive? And what can we learn from that and bring back to our own communities?
Well, I think through my travels, I have recognized that we are more similar than we are different. That as humans, we are born to connect. So we have a natural affinity for connection. And within that connection, Brene Brown talks a lot about this. There's a sense of belongingness, a sense of connectedness, a sense of participation that we thrive for, that is blocked typically because of shame. So there's so many people that feel that they're not enough, that they don't belong, and there are reasons why they feel that way. And Brene Brown talks about this a lot. At the root of all of that is shame and our inability to be vulnerable, because we believe that if we are, people will not accept us if we show who our true selves are, if we are our most authentic self, that we will not be accepted. So that's the root cause of the work that we're working on with our social connectedness impact area at the foundation, is to try to find interventions that strengthen an individual's sense of belongingness, a citizenship, connectedness, and participation in the communities that they live in. So I guess in terms of the communities that I've seen that are doing this well, I would say I was in Thailand when I worked at AARP. I was focused on social isolation as the topic area to help the foundation understand a little bit more about. And I did a study tour in Southeast Asia with an organization called Help Age International. And they took me into these countries and helped me understand a model called the Older People's Association. And these are associations of elders that come together to advocate for themselves, to share resources, and really just to fellowship and stay connected with each other. And I saw that in Thailand, I saw it in Vietnam, I saw it in the Philippines. And so it's this sense of connectedness and belongingness that I think really distinguishes communities from each other. So those that are better at doing that, those that are better at including all kinds of populations and really seeing them and showing them that they are seen, are the ones that thrive the most.
Why do you suppose in our society today, the belonging? So we are, almost all of us are connected through social media to hundreds of people that are supposedly friends, that we can do this. I mean, we're how many hundreds of miles away, and video, we can pick up the phone and call anybody, and we're not counting minutes anymore or paying exorbitant long distance or international call rates. We can, pre-pandemic, we could jump on a plane and get anywhere relatively easily. Now we can still get in a car and go. I mean, our limitations of connection are, there's few limits for connection for many. Obviously, you brought up the point about broadband. There's certainly huge gaps in that. But we are more connected, as you started out, and that's one of the things, and we're connected to information, but we're connected to people. But yet you've just talked about the lack of belonging. Can you help me unpack that? How in a society in a world that has all the technology and what is the greatest benefit of living today, right?
Mhm.
That we that we also are just talking about not being able to belong and feeling shameful about who we are and not able to be vulnerable. I don't know.
Technology is a tool that brings us together, but it doesn't allow us to completely be human. So humanness happens when we are physically in the same space. That's what's the difference, in my opinion. I can have this interaction with you, which is very sterile. It's very technology driven, but it's not the same as the times that we got together when I was in South Dakota and we had a beer. We would just talk, and just being able to see you, being able to, even though this might sound kind of weird, smell, the scent that comes from you, and just, the whole humanness of you, and experiencing that together, is missing with technology. And so I think it's important to recognize that technology is a tool, but it's not ultimately, it doesn't extend the relationship in the way we were born to have that relationship extended.
The belonging is deeper than belonging to a LinkedIn group or
Yeah.
Facebook or yeah.
Yes.
So there's been some news about Clorox just announced the new head of the company,
Yes.
Fortune 500 company.
Very exciting. She adds to the female CEOs in the United States.
Right.
So
Here's a quiz.
the
How
percentage
many?
went up
Go ahead, Walter. Sorry.
this percentage went up a little bit. I don't know. I think they're 32 maybe.
38 out of 500.
Yeah,
But
that's
now
pretty
here's
not good. We need more.
yes, and now here let's jump to the nonprofit sector. If there was a Fortune 500 of foundations,
Yes.
are there 38 minority leaders with African American, Hispanic, Latin?
That's a good question. I know that the percentage is smaller than it needs to be. Out of all the foundations that exist in the world, I think it's less than 2%. I don't know the number, but I know the percent is very low. And that was one of the things that everyone told me that I was crazy to think of, wanting to hold a position like this, because at that time, and that was 5 years ago, it was even smaller. I think it's getting bigger, but it was smaller then. But I didn't really, I don't look at the numbers like that. I mean, again, it's about you and what you want to do. It's not about what everybody else thinks you can do. It's about what you want to do and figuring that out.
What does society miss by not having more diversity in the leadership of foundations and on the boards of foundations?
I think the same thing societies miss, communities miss, when they don't tap into the natural talents of populations because of color, because of sexual orientation, because of gender. Communities lose out. They lose out on creativity. They lose out on a greater sense of connectedness. It's bad.
What's the most important characteristic of a leader?
The most important characteristic of a leader. Well, I think it's one that cultivates a culture of trust. I think if you don't have teams, communities that can't trust each other, you will not have the level of connectivity that allows you to develop solutions, creative solutions to the issues that community is facing. So there's got to be a level of trust.
What's the best piece of advice that you've been given?
Um, that life is about developing others, not developing yourself. So each of us, you and I in particular, live in privilege. And it's important for us to recognize that and to share our privilege with those others that are not as fortunate, to help them achieve their dreams.
Is there a piece of art that you most admire or appreciate?
Uh, the first thing that came to mind was the Scream.
Really?
You know that piece?
Yeah. Why is that? Why?
I think the colors. I think uh, sometimes you feel so frustrated by the conversations that people are choosing not to have, that you know would advance our communities, their lives in much better ways. And we continue to have those conversations. It's over and over, generation after generation. And sometimes you just feel like screaming.
What's the conversation, Walter?
That we are more alike than we are different, that we should be celebrating each other and figuring out how to do that for not only those that are able to do it and figure it out, but for the least, the last, and the lost. Those people that are the weakest links in our community. They should be lifted up and supported, because only when they are supported is our communities able to achieve the strength that they should have.
Why aren't we having that conversation?
Well, now because of the pandemic,
Mm.
I think it's being it's being seen as a distraction when it really should be seen as a disruption that should cause us to think differently about how we approach problems in our community. I think it shouldn't take an invisible virus to help us see more clearly a visible virus that has existed for over 401 years, and that's the virus of discrimination, of basically injustice.
And that would take people in power to lead those discussions. And
Yeah,
power is not just political.
right. Correct.
Um, so in 25 years, where are we? Let's back up. In a year, we've got the pandemic, we've got focus on conversation, racial injustice, and our society and the infrastructure of it. In a year, where are we? If we had this conversation next August, what does it look like?
I think repurposing our public budgets in ways that bring people together and focus on social services that allow us to not only transfer money into communities in an entitled way, but that holds people accountable for really understanding their lives and recognizing that there's only so much the government can do. That it's really up to you to advance your life in the way that you want to advance it, and to support those that, again, the last, the lost, and the least, that aren't able to, for whatever reason, but to really have people coming together across all kinds of lines, all kinds of superficial lines, to develop solutions that really help strengthen communities, and support all the people in the communities, not just some of them.
What do you hope for in the next generation? So 25 years from now, what's the society look like, the United States?
That the injustices are erased, that we see people, again, being more collaborative, celebrating differences, feeling that they belong, feeling that they are enough, and not having to change themselves to appease someone else's idea of what perfect, beautiful are.
Walter, I really appreciate your time. The time has flown by, and I know people are getting off to work, and we've only touched on a number of subjects, but thanks for doing this. Thanks for having a conversation and visiting South Dakota virtually, and hopefully we'll get you to come back up and visit in person. Walter, because of the pandemic, we can't hand you a piece of art from the Susie Kappa Art Center run by the Black Hills Works nonprofit in the Black Hills. But in lieu of that, we'll make a donation in your name to the Susie Kappa Art Center to continue to support the work that they're doing with people of all abilities at that downtown location. As a token of our appreciation. But thank you for taking time. Thanks for sharing your insight, and look forward to learning and following the foundation and the work that it's been doing. A couple highlights just to do it, because you have in 30 seconds, 50 million that's already gone out the door responding to COVID. The total budget, the endowment of the foundation is over 400 million. Yes. You're doing work in aging and food security, and a predominantly focus on health, and predominant focus right now on COVID. And you're at the helm leading the way with that. So thanks for all that work, and it will be great to continue to follow the foundation.
Thanks for the opportunity. Sorry I was late. I have 25 mentors that I choose to spend intentional time with to help them understand that they're not alone, that there are people out there that want them to be successful. I think having intergenerational conversations is important. We don't do enough of that. We don't include younger voices in our conversations, which is also why I think we see these demonstrations happening. It's because we're not inclusive. We're not including. We have biases across the age spectrum too. We are an ageist society. I'm turning 58 this year. And aging has been a privilege, and it should be that way for everyone. I've been able to, like I said, achieve everything I've ever dreamed of. And why can't everybody say that? Why can't that be our standard for everyone's life? For them to be able to say, I stand here knowing that I've been able to achieve everything that I wanted to. So thank you for bringing us all together, for continuing to inspire us to be our best selves, and for helping raise the voice of our rural communities. It's important for people to know that, farmers' lives matter, right? That lives matter too. There are lots of people that don't want to live in urban environments, and that's okay. So how do we work with them to help them live their best lives? So thank you for everything that you're doing.
And I think that's the strength of the country, right? It's diverse and both in all different ways: age, geographic, race. Thanks, Walter. Our next guest on August 26th is Robert H. Frank, author of Success and Luck, Good Fortune, and the Myth of Meritocracy. Walter, I hope you can jump in on that too. But it'll be August 26th. He's a professor at Cornell University's Johnson School of Management. Thanks, everybody, for joining us. Walter, thanks so much for your time, and appreciate it. And I look forward to catching up some more soon.
Have a good day.
Bye now.